Do the Leafs finally have an answer to the Jani Hakanpaa situation? Is Nick Robertson really digging in his heels this summer? And apparently Jake McCabe and the Maple Leafs want to get a contract done. That's all coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Leafs podcast, the daily Maple Leafs centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What is it? Game Time. What's going on, Dave? How you feeling on a Friday?
Pretty good. Couldn't have asked for a more explosive way to start the NFL season. I know you and I are big. We're chatting a little bit about that game.
By a toe. The Ravens lost by a toe. If the man had size 9 instead of like size 14 feet, they probably would have tied that game. They were gonna go for 2. Either way, the Ravens would have covered the number for all of you bettors out there on FanDuel. They would have covered because they were going for 2. So they either would have scored and won the game, or they would have failed and lost the game but covered. But anyways, yeah, it's the NFL's back. Another game tonight. Again, you can wager on FanDuel, our friends, our sports book of the podcast network, on the game. But to the NHL, to hockey, there's quite a bit of news actually that we got to get into. It's going to be a little bit of a It's going to be a little bit of a house cleaning type of episode. We're just going to be hitting on a bunch of different topics and newsy pieces that we've kind of compiled over the last couple of days. You know, everyone's back to work now. So you've got the insiders, you know, all talking. You know, the Chris Johnson show is back. So we've got a report about Jani Hakanpaa from that show. You know, 32 Thoughts has returned with Kyle Bukauskas taking over for Jeff Merrick in that role. So congrats to Bukauskas. That's going to be a really, really cool, job for him. But some news coming out of that show as well. So, you know, lots of news to get into. So let's get right into it. We'll also have our Friday 5-pack coming up in a little bit, and it's a chance for us to kind of sit back and remember the off season. So our Friday 5-pack today is going to be the 5 biggest stories that defined the Maple Leafs off season. So we get to that a little bit later. But let's start with which one was one of the biggest offseason questions, I guess, and storylines that we kind of followed and never really had a resolution for all offseason. It was this Jani Hakanpaa situation. Apparently, there's a bit of an update according to CJ, Dave.
Yeah, so essentially, Chris Johnson been snooping around a little bit, trying to get some info on whether or not Jani Hakanpaa, that situation's done. Apparently it is not. He's a little more optimistic, I'll quote how he put it. I'm a little more optimistic. I mean, this is the 6'7" mystery man, or the 6'6", whatever, you know. He's hiding in plain sight, but a very unusual situation. I've reached out to the people that would be directly involved in this and don't have any 100% confirmation, but it feels as though, based on what I've been able to piece together, we're likely to see him at training camp in Toronto. Those straight from the words of Chris Johnson.
Okay, so likely to see Hakanpaa in training camp in Toronto. Now, my next question would be, as a follow-up, would that be with the original 2-year, $3 million deal, 1.5 AAV, or is this now going to turn into a let's just get you in camp and see what it looks like PTO kind of deal? And if everything checks out and you can get through camp and that knee's all good, then we'll sign you to that original contract that we had, discussed prior. That's now my next question. Is it going to be the original deal with Hakanpaa if he comes to camp, or is it now going to turn into a PTO situation?
Well, that's also my question, right? I'd assume he'd want some sort of like that. This is probably what they're trying to work on, right? Like some sort of, I wouldn't say guarantee because literally with this situation doesn't sound like any guarantee is going to be out there for Hakanpaa, but he's probably wants some assurances to know that if I'm going to come here, I need like almost like the Noah Gregor situation. If I'm going to come here, let's say on a PTO, I show you everything's good. There better be a contract ready to go as soon as we get the all clear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like, have it prearranged where it's like, "Hey, this is what the contract's going to be, right? I just gotta get through camp without an injury and it's there," right? Like, it
Yeah.
almost triggers that contract in a way. That's what I would think would be the situation here, but who knows, you know? Maybe Tree Living was having, a little bit of second thoughts when it came to the Hakanpaa after the report about the bad knee and, the fact that others thought he was never gonna play again because of the bone-on-bone situation going on in that knee, so, it's still a very fascinating situation that the Maple Leafs find themselves here when it comes to Hakanpaa, and I guess we'll see. We'll see, but according to Chris Johnston, the latest report is he expects to see him at training camp. The Leafs would like him to be at training camp, whether that's with a contract or with as a PTO. That I guess is still up in the air. The other little piece of news that came down recently, Leafs exploring extension talks with Jake McCabe. Dave, I'm a big fan of this. I think that Jake McCabe has been one of the least better defensemen over the last couple of seasons since getting here from Chicago. It's been kind of that rough, tough, rugged, top four blue liner that they need. And now I think that the team's gone out and they've acquired and signed a guy like Chris Tanev. Jake McCabe doesn't have to shoulder the load as like the top tier defensive defenseman on the team. So I think he'll be slotted a little more perfectly this upcoming season. That being said, looks like he's looking for a deal. What do you think that would look like?
Oh man, I mean, for Jake McCabe, like we know how important he is. I mean, even the fact that he's gonna have probably a lesser role probably doesn't change too much in terms of how much he's gonna be used. I still think he's gonna be used a lot
Yeah,
because
same.
we know Chris Tanev. You gotta be very careful with how much you're gonna use him as well. I mean, he's gonna be 31 when the season starts. So, I would say for McCabe, he's probably going to be looking for like a 4 or 5 year deal. That would be kind of where I would predict. How much that is? Well, because his salary is retained right now, so like I had to remind myself of how much like what his actual contract
Well,
is, right?
he was so his salary was 4 million is what
Yeah.
his actual AAV was, but 50% of that's been retained by Chicago. So at least it's only been a $2 million cap hit for them. It's been an absolute bargain over the
Mhm.
last couple of seasons. Um, I expect this to be the final year that they're only paying $2 million for Jake McCabe, though. That number is certainly going to go up, and he's going to get a raise from 4 million too. Like I think McCabe is probably somewhere in the fives. I would imagine, like low fives on a multi-year deal. That's probably where I look at Jake McCabe.
That's kind of where I'm in the thought process too. Like you know, how much more can he expect on the open market too? Like you have to think about that as well. Probably could get something half decent, but if you're the Leafs, you try to get this done sooner rather than later. You avoid that lingering potential of him looking elsewhere, right, for a new deal. That's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm. That's kind of where I'm at with it. Like this is why it makes sense to go out and push for it right before things kind of really before he gets any other ideas. Let's just say.
So do we think one gets done and sorted before the season starts?
I don't think so. I think that's something that might happen a little bit closer to inside the season. Now, one thing that's different, and when you and I talked about this off air, is Jake Mc and I didn't even realize this, but Jake McCabe changed agencies this offseason. So back in June, he got a new agent. So likely that was with the thought of, all right, like this next contract's kind of important for me. Let's get the agent in place and do all that stuff. And this is the agent that signed the McMahon deal with the Leafs. So
Okay.
don't think they'd be out, they wouldn't think about, I'm sure they would be okay with negotiating this in the season. Let's just say.
Possibly, but I do like the thought of getting this done
Oh,
before the season starts. So that's not something that he's thinking about throughout the
true.
year and thinking, "Oh, I'm on a contract season," and overthinking things because we've been in a situation where Jake McCabe has been, a little overthinker. In the playoffs, that first year round, his first time in the playoffs, and he was a little overzealous. He was chasing hits, leaving himself vulnerable, leaving his partner out to dry sometimes by doing so. So maybe with a contract in place, the security there, he could just settle in and just play his game. So I personally would like to see an extension done before camp. If they've already started exploring talks, I don't think it would take too long to figure it out. Shouldn't take half a season to get it done. So I'd be a fan of it getting done, by the start of the season at some point throughout camp for sure. For me at least. All right, we got a couple more little newsy items we want to hit on the other side. Status quo for Nick Robertson, but do we see a resolution? And there's a prospect camp coming up next week, so we can talk a little bit about that as well. And we get the Friday 5-pack to come as well. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for this week and next week. And then after that, it's go time, buddy. We're back to daily coverage of the Toronto Maple Leafs Monday through Friday. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts at, and also up on YouTube as well. So still, a little bit away from training camp, a couple of weeks from the start of camp, and still status quo for Nick Robertson on his trade demand. Yesterday I was listening to Pierre LeBrun. He was on overdrive, and he still would prefer a change of scenery. Would still like to play elsewhere. You think we see a resolution with this one before the start of camp?
Doesn't sound like it, which would be wrong in my opinion. And again, I listened to 32 Thoughts, and even Alex Friedman's like, this might be a situation where Robertson should be in a camp somewhere, right? He shouldn't be digging his heels and missing out on training camp time. So he says, like, might have to be a situation where you just take the 1-year deal and kind of bet on yourself.
Yeah.
Like I personally, from the way it's going, it sounds like I'm not going to say stubborn about it, but he's like digging his heels in quite a bit. I don't think that's the right move. I think he should be in a camp somewhere. And so maybe he gets some good advice eventually and does show up to a camp, and that's kind of where I would go if I was Nick Robertson.
But Dave, I get, like you say, like, oh, he should just sign a 1-year deal. He should do. Why would he get a multi-year deal? Like
I know
it would make zero sense for the Leafs
the
to
Leafs would not
sign
do
this guy
that.
to a multi-year deal. Like that's all that would be on the table anyway.
No, again, I don't think there is. I think it's just a 1-year deal that's been on the table this entire time. That's probably where but I don't think personally, I don't think the contract's the issue. I think the issue is just he wants I wouldn't say out of Toronto per se, but he wants a
Well, he
new
does.
opportunity.
He
No, he
that
does,
is
but he
what he
wants a
wants.
new he wants a, well, I guess some would say a better opportunity than what he's had so far.
What
Which
better
again, I don't.
opportunity so far, sure, but going forward, I mean, this guy literally could be a top line winger for this team this year. Like that opportunity is there. That opportunity is available for him. There's like that's what's so confusing about this whole thing with Nick Robertson. He finally has an actual opportunity to stick with the team in the top 6, be a contributor on a nightly basis. And now all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I'm done with this. I don't want to be here anymore. Trade me. Like he could be a top line winner. He could play alongside Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner this season if he played well enough. Like that job is open. He's battling right now with Matthew Nyes and Bobby McMahon. Like he could overtake those guys for that spot, just purely based on who he is as a player and the style that he plays, and being the threat as a big time shooter. So that's where it's just a weird year for him to finally say, nah, I'm gonna dig my heels in. It's like, Nick, you haven't shown anything to really, prove that you're capable and able to do this. I don't know. And to your point, or I guess to Elliot's point, he should be in a training camp. Think about how much time this guy's already missed for development as is due to injury. You're gonna miss more time for
Yeah.
development through training camp because of this. I mean, it sounds like the Leafs aren't willing to trade him for pennies on the dollar. So if no one's going to step up and give the Leafs at least a third round pick for Nick Robertson, they probably would prefer just to keep him because they could use him this upcoming season. So what's he going to do? Not play this year? Is he going to truly hold out all the way through until November, hoping that the Leafs trade him? And then at that point, does he, tuck his tail between his legs and come back? Well, now you've missed the first 2 months of the season because of your own militia, not an injury, because of your own stubbornness. If I was Nick Robertson, I'm with you. Get to camp. Just sign the 1 year deal, and yeah, bet on yourself. You got a new coach. You got a new opportunity to prove yourself to Craig Berube. This is a bad first impression, I would say, when it comes to
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, I'm sure Berube in a way maybe is understanding of where Robertson's coming from, but at the same time, he's probably like, just come to camp, man. Like, like I think it's also like it's no, I'm not Sheldon Keefe. This is new, right? So there's probably a little bit of that too, but again, I don't even know if there's even been any talks between Robertson and Berube, or there's been any attempt to reach out.
Yeah. I just like to be completely blunt. He's not good enough and he hasn't proven enough to be doing this, in my opinion. But
No, he hasn't.
whatever. Nick do you, buddy. Nick, you do you. Um, a place we've seen Nick Robertson quite a few times over the last few years is at the Travis City Prospect Tournament. It was announced earlier this year that Toronto does not plan to go to Traverse City for that prospect tournament like they have in the past. Is there another prospect tournament that the Maple Leafs plan on sending their youngins to over the next couple of weeks here, Dave, ahead of training camp? Though, have you seen anything on that?
Yeah, like I was surprised that something hadn't been announced at this point because a lot of teams are announcing their prospect camps and who's participating. Then I saw the Montreal Canadiens put out that there's going to be a prospect showdown between them and the Leafs, September 14th and 15th. And I'm like, usually things like that, both teams would announce it together, but it
Yeah.
was the Canadiens now, and like this is going to be at the Bell Center. So
When was the announcement?
September 3rd. So happened a couple days ago.
Couple days ago, yeah. I don't know why the Leafs wouldn't have been involved in that. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's go to head in the inaugural edition of the Prospect Showdown. So you can get tickets for $10.
Oh, nice and cheap. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. They
So
used to do the prospect tournament when it was in London
yeah.
a couple of years ago, and when I was at Western University, and I used to be able to get tickets pretty cheap for like $10, $15. It was pretty cool. going out and seeing that. I remember watching Marner play back in the day at the prospect tournament. That was about that time. Willie, I think, was playing at the prospect tournament then. Soshnikov was playing back in those days.
I
Couple of
went to
teams
one of
there.
those too. I'm trying to remember when it was exactly. I want to
Yeah.
say 2017, maybe
Yeah.
2016, 2017.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was when Marner was there.
No,
But I
I
remember
think
making the
it was
drive
like,
all the way out to London. That was
yeah, 15, 16 or something when Marner was there. Um, but yeah, like, so, okay, so it looks like we do have a bit of a, I guess not necessarily a prospect tournament. It's more of a prospect showdown is what they're calling it. So it's just the Maple Leafs versus the Canadiens. So like a team A, team B type of thing, or do we know
no.
anymore?
It
Yeah,
probably what they usually do for those is they'll have like like a big prospect roster,
yeah,
and they
and
would
kind of
just
split
like
squad.
split almost like a split squad, right? They'll have like 3 goalies or 2 or 3 goalies, then they'll have like what, like eight defensemen or like 9 defensemen. They can just
Usually,
swap guys out.
yeah, and then it's kind of sometimes even more than that. But yeah, and then they'll just kind of rotate them and play them almost like you do in training camp, where just kind of everyone gets a look see, and they just get a chance to look at everyone for the first time. But I'd imagine Easton Cowan will probably end up playing in that tournament. Fraser Minton will probably end up playing in that tournament. Topi Niemela will probably be there. That's the thing about prospect tournaments. It's not just like the young kids. You also get like some of the older prospects. Like, I think Bobby McMahon last year might have been part of the
He
prospect
he was
tournament.
supposed to be, but he was hurt. And I don't think
Right,
he played.
right, right. Or he got hurt like at the prospect tournament or something like that. Or maybe that was 2 years ago, but, yeah, you can some older prospects like an Alex Steves might show up there who just signed an RFA deal recently. So, unlike, like the World Juniors where there's an actual age limit, there's technically no age limit. So, could see some older prospects there as well. So, looks like that's gonna be happening, say, next weekend, you said, in Montreal?
Yeah.
So keep an eye on that. We'll obviously talk about that more next week. And then the final little piece of house cleaning before we get to our Friday 5 pack. We talked about this the other day, funny enough. The PWHL, we were talking about how the Toronto team is moving from the Mattamy Center into Coca-Cola Coliseum. So they're getting a big upgrade there and getting a lot more seats so fans can go and watch. And it sounds like we're finally going to get the nicknames. We're literally just saying they should probably have this press conference where they announce all of the nicknames for the PWHL teams before training camps open up in the NHL. Don't drown out the news. And I did see a little piece of news that said, new era starting September 9th. So is September 9th the day we finally get those PWHL nicknames, Dave?
So, like, funny enough, after we talked about it, I went back to look again. I think the PWHL Ottawa general manager said like probably like it was initially supposed to happen in August, but then it got delayed to like mid-September, is what they
Yeah.
said. So, but again, I was like, I'll believe it when I see it. So apparently, like there had already been like rumors about what the nicknames were gonna be.
Do we know Toronto's?
I am looking at that right now. I think I saw somewhere that the Toronto Torch,
Oh,
because
why?
there was, so they do applications for names, right, for trademarks. So there was like Toronto Torch was one. I didn't see any other ones potentially put out there, but the Athletic had it as the Toronto Torch, Montreal Echo, Ottawa Alert, Minnesota Superior, Boston Wicked, and New York Sound were filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So that
I
was
don't
back
like
a while ago.
any of
But
those.
again, those were probably just thrown in there. Sometimes they do it just also to like keep people guessing, because like when Utah was doing theirs, they threw out, I mean, you saw all the different names that were thrown
Yeah,
in for the Utah one.
yeah, yeah. They
But
trademarked like 11, and then they'll pick one of them. So I hope so, because I don't like the sound of any of those. To be honest with you. Maybe the Minnesota Superior, because Lake Superior go through Minnesota. Probably, I'm guessing. That might
Yeah.
be the only one that makes sense to me, but, like, Toronto Torch. Like, okay, alliteration, cool, but what does a torch have to do with Toronto? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, the torch bearers of the league, because it's Toronto, the hockey mecca? I don't know. That would be interesting to hear how they settled on that nickname if that seems to be the case. But September 9th, we might hear, according to a tweet from the PWHL, that's a new era starting September 9th. So I'm just putting two and two together. That's when we're gonna hear, you know, the nicknames and maybe the schedule release and everything's kind of going to happen. A lot of new announcements coming on that date next week. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back. Let's get to our Friday 5-pack. The 5 biggest stories that defined the Maple Leafs offseason. We'll get to that next. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Pick that makes game picks tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching thousands of tickets. The Game Time Picks curates and makes things easier to save more on sports, comedy, theater events, and anything you're looking to get tickets for. They've got tremendous seat views on the app. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you even buy it. And they've got the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Game Time. Download Game Time today. What is it? Game Time. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you. And the off season is still technically ongoing, I suppose, for the next, couple of weeks here until training camp opens up. And we've been doing this every Friday. It's our Friday 5-pack. And today we're going to be looking at the 5 biggest stories that define the Maple Leafs off season. It's after Labor Day. It kind of feels like the new season is upon us. So, let's look back really, for maybe like the final time and put together a 5-pack of the biggest stories that define the summer for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So let's start things off. We'll go, what do you want to do? 5 through 1, 1 through 5. How do you want to start this off, Dave?
We're going to do 5 through 1.
All right, 5 through 1. You can go with your 5th biggest story of the summer.
I mean, I'll go with Nick Robertson, because we've been talking about it quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's a huge story, but it's been a talkative one, right? There's been a lot of discussions about what to do with him, whether he's going to show up to camp or not. Now, as we're talking about it, so like it's dominated quite a few headlines in an offseason where we're looking for anything really to talk about.
Honestly, I had Nick Robertson trade request as my 5th one as well. So we're in the same boat there. And we spoke on it, quite heavily in the first segment, so we don't need to spend much time on it. But it's definitely taken up a lot of oxygen. And let's be honest, for a couple podcasters like us, it has been a nice storyline to be able to follow and talk about all summer. So, but it's definitely something that we hope gets resolved soon now that training camp is right around the corner. All right. What was the 4th biggest story that defined the Maple Leafs offseason?
So for me, I was kind of going through like the list of all the stuff that's happened, and like I feel like this might be downplaying a little bit, but I want to say the Craig Berube hiring. Like, we've talked about it, but we haven't talked about it like I think most fan bases would be talking about, or most media would be talking about a new coach coming in. Like, yeah, we discussed it a little bit, but there hasn't been like a deep dive into like what changes could happen, what are the expectations, because Craig Berube hasn't really said that much. I haven't really heard we've heard a little bit from him, but like we have no idea what to expect with training camp around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, Berube came in, had his opening press conference, and then we really haven't heard from him since. I believe he was there at the Austin Matthews press conference. But really, haven't heard a whole lot from Craig Berube. He's a little bit higher on my list. At number 4, though, I had the great Jani Hakanpaa mystery. Again, something that we've just talked about extensively all summer long, right? It's given us a lot of tremendous content to discuss here on the podcast. So for me, that's what I had at number 4. And then I had Craig Berube at number 3. That's where I had it. So I just had, one spot behind you. But obviously that was a big story. The Leafs firing Sheldon Keefe and replacing him with Craig Berube, a Stanley Cup winning coach who brings a completely different mentality to this team, to the Leafs. He's going to bring an identity to the group. So I thought that was a pretty big story throughout the offseason. And I think it will become more of a headline as we get into camp and once we see how different the team actually looks and the identity of the group once they get there and once they start playing games. I think that's where we'll start to say, oh, this is what's going to be different. Oh, this is how Berube's doing things. Whereas, it used to be like this under Sheldon Keefe. So I think we'll get that compare and contrast once games start going, probably as early as training camp, but certainly, the first couple of games of the season, we'll notice a difference in how a Berube team is constructed and how they operate and how they play in comparison to Sheldon Keefe. So I think those conversations will certainly be coming up. I know that you and I will be diving into those once the games get going. But I had Berube at number 3. Who'd you have?
I had Hakanpaa at 3.
All right, so we just flipped them.
Yeah, we just flipped them. It's one of I don't remember the last time. I don't even know really when there's ever been a situation like this where a player agrees to a deal, we hear about it, GM's talking about it, and then it's like crickets. Like, is he actually coming? Is he actually here? And especially when it's like, oh, there was also an article that made people a little weary about whether the signing should have happened. It's like, well, actually, technically, hasn't really happened yet because no one's announced it officially. So, yeah, it's been one of the more bizarre, I think, stories just because we're still in limbo of knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean it truly is just it's been a big mystery throughout the entire off season and hopefully come training camp we'll get a resolution. I mean we'll have to like we're come media day someone's going to ask the question if Jani Hakanpaa is or isn't there, like what's going on with this guy, or even if he's there, like what took so long to make this work, make this happen. So I think we'll get our answers in the next couple of weeks here. At number 2, I had the Chris Tanev signing. Chris Tanev coming into Toronto. It's been a long time coming, right? We believe he's the perfect partner for Morgan Riley. So bringing in Chris Tanev was huge. That was a massive free agent move. Technically, actually, it was an extension because they traded for him and then extended him prior to the contract, prior to July 1st. So technically, it was an extension. But anyways, I think that definitely, when you look back this summer, was the biggest on ice move that they made. So for me, the Chris Tanev signing, one of the biggest stories that should define this past summer.
Well, I had it as like the big additions on the blue line, like the revamp of the blue line. So the Tanev and OEL kind of put those two together because that was their big move of the off season. They didn't add anything up front. They got Stolars, they got Gabe Wold a new deal, but the big change was the blue line. So that's going to be like when you look into what's going to be different. You're going to have two guys that are hoping are going to finally provide a little bit of stability on that back end after we'd always be like, oh, who are the Leafs going to try and add at the trade deadline? There's likely less of a need. There'll probably be a need to add a defenseman, probably, depending on what happens throughout the year. But you're not going to be like, oh, are they going to go out and get a Chris Tanev? They already finally went out and got that big fish.
Right. And he'll be here for all 82. Well, hopefully all 82. The number one story, I mean, I'm assuming we're both in the same boat here, but the exchange of captaincy from John Tavares to Austin Matthews. Matthews getting the C that was a big time. That was a big time move that I wasn't expecting to see
Yeah.
happen this summer. I thought maybe next summer we would see that move happen. Considering that Tavares is still going to be a Maple Leaf this year, but graciously, and emphatically, um, passing the torch on to Austin Matthews, giving him the captaincy last month. To me, that was massive. Showed great leadership and the right call because Matthews is the leader of this team. I fully believe that, and now he's got the letter on his chest to prove it as well on the ice. But now he'll get to do it off the ice. So, Austin Matthews getting the C. That to me was the number one story for the Leafs this summer.
Yeah, like it's because it just happened, as you said. No one was expecting it. Like there wasn't a. It did eventually get reported, but like considering the talks happened right after the season happened, and we didn't hear a report until like the day before, 2 days before it was going to be announced.
Yeah,
like to me, that's what made it such a big story, is because no one saw it coming. No one was expecting it.
It only got reported because the Maple Leafs had sent out a press release that they were going to do a press conference in 2 days, and it was
Yeah,
like,
a
huh,
media event at Real Sports.
yeah. And then lo and behold, a couple minutes later, the insiders get a hold of the information and say it sounds like Matthews is getting the C, and that's what this is all for. And kind of came out of nowhere, but yeah, we're going into 24-25. Austin Matthews, captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs for the upcoming season under head coach Craig Berube. Two totally different things than we said a year ago to the date. That's for sure. So there it is, the Friday 5-pack, the 5 biggest stories that defined the Maple Leafs off season. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday. Enjoy your weekends. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.